So today we're going to be looking at another kind of display that we haven't done yet. So we're going to be creating relative frequency graphs. So let's start out with a circle graph. I'll explain relative frequency later. So here's an example. Randy's been asked to create a graphical display showing the distribution of the library's collection in 6 categories. His boss asked him to create 2 rough drafts, and together they're going to decide which one to finalize for the display. So we're actually going to create 2 different displays of this data. So first we're going to do a circle graph. Now 2 things to remember. Circle graphs have to add up to 100% when we do our percentages, and also the sectors of the circle graph have to add up to 360 degrees because there are 360 degrees in a circle, right? So let's take a look at how we get that started. So how can we figure out the percent, first of all, that each of the categories in Randy's information here are going to take up? What's their percent? Well, remember, percent is just a part of a whole. In other words, we can use a fraction to figure out our percentage, right? So if I'm looking at the children's fiction, right here, we have 35,994 items. Well, that's out of a total of 199,659 items. So I can just use a fraction here. So here are the percentages you should have found if you rounded to the nearest percent. So again, this is just a division problem. The part divided by the whole thing to get your decimal and then your percent. So here are my percents for this particular data. Now to make a circle graph, we have to convert those percents to degrees because we want to measure each sector with our protractor and make our circle graph as accurate as possible. So here's where we're going to find our circle graph. Now, in order to turn those percents into percents into degrees, we have to remember that there are 360 degrees in a circle. So if we look at the statement for children's fiction, 18% of 360 degrees, now of is our key word, right? Because we know that of, when it comes to math, is just multiplication, right? So I'm going to take my percent, I'm going to use my decimal, so 18% is the same as 18 hundredths, or 18 per 100, and I'm going to multiply by 360. So this is 18% of 360. And when I do that on my calculator, I'm going to get 65 degrees. So once we get all of our degree measures, I'm going to go ahead and write that right here. Once we get all of our degree measures, we can go ahead and make our circle graph. I'm going to pause here for a second, have you do the rest of the categories, adult fiction, nonfiction, media, and others. Now I'm going to go ahead and create a real rough circle graph because I'm not going to measure these with my protractor at this moment. But I'm going to take a look and draw a reasonable circle graph here. So if I look at, oh, and I made a mistake. Right here was the children's fiction, not nonfiction. So I started over here with nonfiction. So if I start with the children's fiction, or my 65 degrees, right? So I take the center of my circle, I want to start in the center, and I do about 65 degrees. Now 65 is less than 90, so this is going to take up less than a quarter of your graph, right? Okay, so I'm going to go about 65 degrees. And again, this is all pretty rough, so you're actually going to measure yours. So there's my children's fiction, and I'm going to go ahead and label that as well. You can also label that with your degree measure. I'm sorry, not your degree measure, but your percent. So I can go ahead and write in there 18% also. Okay, and then I'm going to keep going. I'm going to do my children's nonfiction. So nonfiction, again, that's 50 degrees. That's about half of a right angle. So I'm going to go in there and I'm going to create my children's nonfiction. And I'm going to keep going like that until my circle is completely filled in. Now when you measure this with your protractor, you're going to get really accurate measurements. Mine are not going to be accurate. Okay, so, and I'm going to have those be different colors so I can easily compare my parts. Okay, so there's my really rough beginning of a circle graph. Now remember, you're always going to want a title here for your circle graph as well. So I just put title. You're going to title this something like categories of books in the library or books in the library, something like that. So one other thing I want to point out is this word relative frequency. So a circle graph is a good way to show relative frequency. All that means is that you can show how the parts compare to each other and compare to the whole picture. In other words, when I finish this circle graph, I would be able to tell how children's fiction compares to children's nonfiction really easily. I could also look at how children's fiction compares to the whole circle graph, compares to all the other data put together. Finally, one other thing I can do is I can take my percents and go back to the percents rather than the degree measures, and I can create a bar graph from the percent information. This can also show relative frequency. It can show how your data compares with each other and can compare the whole thing for all the categories put together. So the only thing that's different about this bar graph compared to other bar graphs that you've done is I'm going to be using a percent over here, right? Instead of just a straight value. So I might go by fives. Seems like a good interval for the data that I have. So I go ahead and I start creating that. You may look at children's fiction. So children's fiction is 18%. So I'm going to go ahead and draw my bar. It's going to be really rough again. Well, there's 15. So I'm going to go just about up to 20, but not quite. And I'm going to create my bar for children's fiction. And I'm going to go ahead and go and do that for all my other categories. Now again, we always want to make sure to have a title. So you're going to put your descriptive title up here as well. And there you have relative frequencies.